Ken Norton, the man who solved Muhammad Ali. The 1970s were not simply another decade in boxing. They were an era when heavyweights didn't just fight for titles, they fought for immortality. And amongst the legends who defined that brutal decade, few were more underappreciated, more technically brilliant, or more controversially overlooked than Ken Norton. Kenneth Howard Norton was born on 9th August 1943 in Jacksonville, Illinois. He came to boxing relatively late, not turning professional until 1967 at the age of 24. His early career was solid but unremarkable, a string of victories against journeymen and regional contenders that suggested competence but not greatness. Boxing observers saw him as a good fighter, perhaps a fringe contender, but certainly not a future champion. Then came 31st March 1973, and everything changed. Norton faced Muhammad Ali in San Diego, California. Ali was the former heavyweight champion, stripped of his title for refusing induction into the military during the Vietnam War. But he'd returned to boxing and was rebuilding his path back to the championship. He'd lost to Joe Frazier in 1971, but had since reeled off a series of victories. The Norton fight was meant to be a tune-up, an easy victory against a solid but unspectacular opponent before bigger challenges ahead. Ali entered the ring as a massive favorite. Norton was given virtually no chance. What followed shocked the boxing world. Norton employed an unusual defensive style, a cross-arm guard, where he held both forearms in front of his face and body, creating a barrier that confused Ali's timing and neutralized the jab that had dominated so many opponents. Norton's awkward, choppy style, criticized by purists as ungainly, proved maddeningly effective against Ali's fluid combinations. More importantly, Norton brought relentless pressure. He walked through Ali's punches, closed distance, and turned the fight into a grinding physical battle. Ali, accustomed to dictating pace and range, found himself forced into Norton's fight. The planned tune-up became a genuine war. During the fight, Norton landed a devastating blow that fractured Ali's jaw. Ali, displaying the almost superhuman toughness that defined his career, fought through the injury for 12 rounds, never quitting despite excruciating pain. But the fracture affected his ability to speak between rounds, limited his offensive output, and added a layer of suffering to an already difficult night. When the decision was announced, a split-decision victory for Norton, the sporting world was stunned. Muhammad Ali, the most famous athlete on the planet, had been defeated by a fighter most casual fans had never heard of. Norton had not just won, he'd physically broken Ali in the process. The psychological impact was profound. Ali would later describe the Norton loss as more devastating than his defeat to Frazier, because it came when he was supposed to be ascending back to championship contention. Norton, meanwhile, transformed overnight from journeyman to genuine threat. His victory proved that Ali, for all his genius, could be solved with the right style and sufficient determination. 6 months later, they fought again at the Los Angeles Forum. Ali, his jaw healed but his ego bruised, approached the rematch with obsessive focus. The fight was closer than their first encounter, less grinding, more tactical. Ali boxed more cautiously, respecting Norton's power and awkward timing. Norton pressed forward, confident after his previous success, hunting for the same openings. The fight went the full 12 rounds, and once again the decision was split. This time, Ali was awarded the victory, but it was razor-thin, controversial, and still debated by boxing historians. Many observers, then and now, believed Norton deserved the decision. The scoring was close enough that either man could justifiably claim victory. The trilogy was completed on 28 September 1976 at Yankee Stadium. Ali was now the heavyweight champion again, having defeated George Foreman in Zaire. Norton was the mandatory challenger, having earned his shot through victories over respected contenders. The stakes were clear: Ali's championship versus Norton's claim to being the one man who truly had Ali's measure. The fight was brutal, close and exhausting. Both men were past their absolute peaks. Ali had absorbed tremendous punishment in Manila against Frazier the previous year, and Norton had been through his own wars. They traded rounds in a tactical chess match that showcased both men's ring intelligence. Norton's awkward style continued to frustrate Ali, whilst Ali's movement and ring generalship kept Norton from fully imposing his will. After 15 grueling rounds, the decision was announced. Ali retained his title by unanimous decision, but once again, the scoring was controversial. Many ringside observers believed Norton had done enough to win. The decision seemed influenced by Ali's championship status and star power as much as by the actual action in the ring. Norton's record against Ali stood at 1 official victory and 2 narrow defeats. But the reality, understood by everyone who watched those fights, was that Norton had pushed Ali to the absolute limit every single time. He'd broken Ali's jaw, taken him to the brink twice more, and never been dominated. Against the man many consider the greatest boxer of all time, Norton had more than held his own. In 1978, Norton finally achieved his dream of becoming heavyweight champion, though not in the way he'd hoped. He was awarded the WBC title when Leon Spinks refused to face him, choosing instead a rematch with Ali. Norton was a champion, but one who'd never won the title in the ring, a circumstance that diminished the achievement in many eyes, including perhaps his own. Norton's legacy is complicated by those narrow defeats and the manner in which he won his title, but his place amongst the greatest fighters of the 1970s is secure. He proved that Muhammad Ali, for all his brilliance, could be neutralized with the right approach. He survived and thrived in an era of devastating punches and relentless warriors, and he did it with a style that, whilst unorthodox, was devastatingly effective against the very best. Joe Frazier, Smokin', Joe and the Warrior's Heart. If Ken Norton was the technical puzzle that confounded Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier was something far more primal, a force of nature wrapped in human form, a fighter whose style was less boxing and more controlled violence. Joseph William Frazier was born on 12th of January 1944 in Beaufort, South Carolina, the youngest of 13 children in a sharecropper's family. He came to boxing through hardship, moving to Philadelphia as a teenager and discovering the sport in a local gym. What he lacked in natural size, Frazier stood only 5 feet 11 inches. Short for a heavyweight, he compensated for with ferocious work ethic and a fighting style built on relentless forward pressure. Frazier's approach was simple in concept but devastating in execution. He would crouch low, bob and weave to avoid incoming punches, then surge forward throwing brutal hooks to the body and head. His signature weapon was a left hook that generations of fighters would study and fear. Once Frazier closed distance, he became a human battering ram, throwing punches in combinations that broke opponents' will as much as their bodies. He turned professional in 1965 and quickly established himself as a serious contender. Whilst Muhammad Ali was in exile, stripped of his title for refusing military service, Frazier fought his way to championship recognition. In 1970, he defeated Jimmy Ellis to become the undisputed heavyweight champion, though the absence of Ali meant many considered the title incomplete. Then came 8 March 1971, Madison Square Garden, New York City. The fight of the century, Muhammad Ali returned from exile versus Joe Frazier, the reigning champion. Both men were undefeated. Both claimed to be the true heavyweight king. The build-up was venomous, with Ali subjecting Frazier to a campaign of psychological warfare that included calling him ugly, stupid, and a tool of the white establishment, insults that wounded Frazier deeply and fueled a hatred that would last decades. The fight itself lived up to its billing. For 15 rounds, 2 undefeated champions waged war under the brightest lights boxing had ever seen. Ali boxed brilliantly at times, using his speed and movement to frustrate Frazier. But Frazier kept coming. walking through Ali's best punches, grinding away at Ali's body, dragging him into the kind of brutal physical battle where Frazier thrived. In the 15th and final round, with both men exhausted and the decision uncertain, Frazier landed the most famous punch of his career, a left hook that lifted Ali off his feet and deposited him on the canvas. Ali rose, proving his incredible toughness, but the knockdown sealed Frazier's victory. The decision was unanimous. Joe Frazier had defeated Muhammad Ali, handing Ali his first professional loss and cementing his own place in boxing history. Frazier defended his title twice more, then faced George Foreman in Kingston, Jamaica, on 22nd January 1973. What happened that night remains one of the most devastating displays of punching power in heavyweight history. Foreman, younger, bigger, and armed with frightening power, dismantled Frazier. He knocked Frazier down 6 times in less than 2 rounds, each knockdown more brutal than the last. The referee stopped the massacre, and Frazier's championship reign was over. The loss to Foreman exposed a fundamental truth about Frazier's style. Whilst it was devastatingly effective against most opponents, it left him vulnerable to massive punchers who could catch him coming in. Foreman had solved Frazier the way Norton had solved Ali, through style, power, and strategy. But Frazier wasn't finished. He fought his way back to contention, setting up a rematch with Ali on 28th January 1974 at Madison Square Garden. This time, Ali won a close decision, evening their rivalry at 1 victory each. The fight lacked the epic quality of their first encounter, but was competitive throughout. The trilogy fight, scheduled for 1st October 1975 in Manila, Philippines, became one of the most brutal contests in boxing history. The thriller in Manila was fought in oppressive heat and humidity that turned the ring into a furnace. Both men, past their absolute peaks but still capable of extraordinary violence, pushed each other to the brink of collapse. Ali dominated the early rounds with superior boxing skill. Frazier stormed back in the middle rounds, his relentless pressure and body punching taking a terrible toll. By the later rounds, both men were fighting through exhaustion, pain, and damage that would have stopped lesser fighters. Ali's face was swollen grotesquely. Frazier's eyes were nearly closed from the accumulated punishment. After 14 rounds of unimaginable brutality, Frazier's corner stopped the fight, unwilling to send their warrior out for a 15th round he could barely see to fight. Ali collapsed in his corner, later saying it was the closest he'd ever come to dying in the ring. The fight had taken something irreplaceable from both men. Frazier fought on for a few more years, but was never the same. The accumulated damage from wars with Ali and Foreman and other top contenders had taken their toll. He retired in 1976, attempted a comeback in 1981 that lasted 1 fight, then finally hung up the gloves for good. Joe Frazier's legacy is inseparable from his rivalry with Ali. The bitterness between them never fully healed. Frazier felt Ali's pre-fight insults had been cruel and racist, whilst Ali seemed unable or unwilling to fully acknowledge the hurt he'd caused. They reconciled partially in later years, but the wounds ran deep. Yet Frazier's place amongst the all-time greats is secure. His first fight with Ali proved he could defeat the most gifted boxer of his generation. His wars with Foreman and Ali showed courage that bordered on superhuman. His left hook remains one of the most feared weapons in heavyweight history, and his fighting style, crude by classical standards but devastatingly effective, influenced generations of fighters who understood that heart and pressure could overcome superior skill. Joe Frazier died on 7th of November 2011 from liver cancer. The boxing world mourned the loss of a true warrior, a man who'd rather collapse than surrender, who defined an era through his willingness to walk through fire to break his opponents. The 1970s produced many great fighters, but few embodied the decade's brutal ethos more completely than Smokin' Joe Frazier. George Foreman, the puncher who terrified a generation, Before the world knew George Foreman as the avuncular pitchman selling grills and smiling on television, the 1970s knew him as something far more frightening. Young George Foreman wasn't a boxer in the traditional sense. He was a puncher of such devastating power that opponents entered the ring already half defeated by fear alone. George Edward Foreman was born on 10th of January 1949 in Marshall, Texas, and raised in Houston's tough Fifth Ward neighborhood. A troubled youth headed towards serious trouble, Foreman's life changed when he joined the Job Corps and discovered boxing. His natural physical gifts were immediately apparent. He stood 6 feet 3 inches, weighed over 220 pounds, and possessed arm length that gave him extraordinary reach. But it was his punching power that set him apart from every heavyweight of his generation. Foreman turned professional in 1969 after winning Olympic gold in Mexico City. His rise through the heavyweight ranks was meteoric and terrifying. He didn't outbox opponents, he destroyed them. Fights rarely lasted beyond a few rounds. Men who'd been considered legitimate contenders crumpled under Foreman's assault like tin cans. His punching technique was crude compared to technical masters, but the sheer force behind each blow made technique irrelevant. By 1973, Foreman had compiled a record of 37-0 with 34 knockouts. His next opponent was Joe Frazier, the reigning heavyweight champion who defeated Muhammad Ali and was considered one of the most fearsome fighters in boxing. The bout was scheduled for 22 January 1973 in Kingston, Jamaica, and most observers expected a competitive fight between two devastating punchers. What actually happened shocked the boxing world. Foreman didn't just defeat Frazier, he annihilated him. In less than 2 full rounds, Foreman knocked Frazier down 6 times. Each knockdown was more brutal than the last, with Frazier flying across the ring from the force of Foreman's punches. The champion, who'd walked through Ali's best shots and won, looked helpless against Foreman's power. The referee stopped the massacre at 1:35 of the second round. The manner of victory was as important as the result. Foreman hadn't outboxed Frazier or caught him with a lucky punch. He'd systematically dismantled one of the toughest fighters alive through sheer, overwhelming force. The message to the heavyweight division was clear: George Foreman was unstoppable. Foreman defended his title twice in 1973, knocking out Joe Roman in 1 round and Ken Norton in 2. Norton, who'd broken Muhammad Ali's jaw and pushed Ali to the limit in their trilogy, lasted barely 6 minutes against Foreman. The destruction was so complete that many observers believed no active heavyweight could defeat George Foreman. He seemed too big, too strong, too powerful. Then came 30th of October 1974, and the rumble in the jungle. Muhammad Ali, at 32 years old and considered past his prime, challenged Foreman in Kinshasa, Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo. The fight was promoted as a cultural event, with Don King orchestrating the spectacle and the Zairean dictator Mobutu Sese Seko providing funding. Ali was installed as a massive underdog. Foreman was 25, undefeated, and in his physical prime. Most experts predicted a Foreman knockout, possibly in the early rounds. Ali had other plans. He'd studied Foreman's previous fights and identified a potential weakness. Foreman's devastating power came from throwing heavy punches with bad intentions, but that approach required tremendous energy. If someone could survive the initial assault and force Foreman to punch himself into exhaustion, he might be vulnerable later in the fight. This strategy became known as the rope-a-dope. Ali leaned against the ropes, which were looser than normal, allowing him to lean back further, and covered up whilst Foreman unleashed his arsenal. Ali absorbed tremendous punishment, but the ropes absorbed much of the force, and Ali's defensive skills allowed him to deflect or roll with punches that might otherwise have knocked him unconscious. Round after round, Foreman threw everything at Ali, massive hooks to the body, uppercuts that could have decapitated a normal man. Combinations thrown with murderous intent. Ali took them, taunted Foreman between exchanges, and waited. In the corners between rounds, Ali's trainer, Angelo Dundee, screamed at him to get off the ropes and box, but Ali stuck to his plan. By the 8th round, Foreman was exhausted. His punches, while still dangerous, had lost their snap. His arms felt like lead. He'd thrown everything at Ali, and the stubborn bastard was still standing, still talking, still taunting. Then Ali saw his opening. He came off the ropes and unleashed a combination that caught Foreman flush. The champion, punched out and exhausted, went down. Foreman rose at the count of 8, but the referee stopped the fight. Muhammad Ali, at 32, had done the impossible. He'd defeated the most feared puncher in heavyweight history through a combination of tactical genius, extraordinary toughness, and psychological warfare. The loss devastated Foreman. For a man who'd built his identity on being unbeatable, the defeat in Zaire was crushing. He fought on for a few more years, winning most of his bouts, but suffering another loss to Jimmy Young in 1977 that convinced him to retire. Foreman stepped away from boxing, became an ordained minister, and seemed finished with the sport forever. What makes Foreman's 1970s career remarkable isn't just the success, but the fear he inspired. Opponents entered the ring against Foreman already defeated psychologically, knowing that one clean punch could end the fight catastrophically. His demolition of Frazier remains one of the most one-sided title fights in history. His power forced Ali to devise an entirely new strategy just to survive. Foreman's story didn't end in the 1970s. His remarkable comeback in the 1990s, culminating in regaining the heavyweight title at age 45, added another chapter to his legend. But it was the 1970s that established George Foreman as one of the most devastating punchers boxing has ever seen, a man who could end fights with a single shot, and who forced the greatest boxer of all time to risk everything on an audacious tactical gamble just to have a chance of survival. Roberto Duran, Hands of Stone, and the lightweight king. Whilst heavyweights dominated the headlines and captured the public imagination during the 1970s, a different kind of fighter was establishing a legacy that would transcend weight classes and decades. Roberto Duran, fighting primarily at lightweight during the 1970s, built a reputation as perhaps the most complete and ferocious fighter of his generation. Pound for pound, the most dangerous man in boxing. Roberto Duran Samaniego was born on 16th June 1951 in Guararé, Panama, and raised in the slums of El Chorillo in Panama City. His childhood was defined by poverty so severe that fighting became not just a sport, but a survival mechanism. Duran's early life on the streets taught him a viciousness and intensity that would define his boxing career. When he turned professional in 1968 at the age of 16, he brought that street-forged mentality into the ring. What made Duran extraordinary wasn't a single attribute, but a complete package of skills deployed with savage intensity. His inside fighting was the finest the sport had seen. He could work at close quarters with a combination of short, brutal punches to the body and head that broke opponents' wills. His hand speed was exceptional, particularly for a fighter known primarily for power. His ring intelligence allowed him to adjust tactics mid-fight, solving problems that lesser fighters couldn't comprehend. And his psychological warfare, the glare, the insults, the absolute refusal to show weakness, intimidated opponents before the first bell rang. But it was Duran's body punching that truly set him apart. He attacked the liver, ribs, and solar plexus with scientific precision and brutal force. Opponents who survived the early rounds often found themselves compromised in later rounds, their bodies breaking down from accumulated punishment. Duran understood that breaking a man's body was the surest path to breaking his spirit. He captured the WBA lightweight title on 26 June 1972, defeating Ken Buchanan in New York City. The fight ended controversially in the 13th round when Duran landed what appeared to be a low blow that left Buchanan writhing in pain, unable to continue. Duran was awarded the victory by technical knockout, though the manner of victory was disputed. But controversy didn't diminish Duran's dominance. It merely added to his aura as a fighter who would do whatever necessary to win. What followed was one of the most dominant championship reigns in boxing history. From 1972 through 1978, Duran defended his lightweight title 12 times, facing every credible challenger the division could produce. He defeated former champions, undefeated prospects, and tough journeymen with equal ruthlessness. His reign wasn't about close decisions or controversial victories. It was about systematic destruction of everyone placed in front of him. Duran's style during this period was not elegant in the classical sense. He didn't dance and move like Sugar Ray Robinson or Muhammad Ali. Instead, he stalked opponents like a predator, cutting off the ring, forcing them into exchanges where his superior inside work and body punching would prevail. He made fighters fight his fight, dragging them into brutal physical wars that few could win. His 1974 victory over Esteban de Jesus was particularly significant. De Jesus had handed Duran his first professional defeat in 1972, a controversial decision, and the rematch was personal. Duran stopped de Jesus in the 11th round, reclaiming psychological dominance and solidifying his position as the undisputed king of the lightweight division. The rivalry would culminate in a third fight in 1978, which Duran won by knockout in the 12th round, definitively settling their rivalry. Throughout the 1970s, Duran's reputation extended beyond his division. Fighters in higher weight classes respected and feared him. His nickname, Manos de Piedra, Hands of Stone, wasn't marketing hype. It was an accurate description of what it felt like to be hit by Roberto Duran. His punches didn't just hurt, they accumulated damage that compromised opponents' ability to function effectively. What separated Duran from other dominant champions was his mental approach. He didn't just want to defeat opponents, he wanted to humiliate them, to prove his superiority so completely that no doubt remained. This mentality made him particularly dangerous, because he would continue attacking even when victory was assured, seeking the knockout rather than coasting to a decision. Opponents knew they were in for 12 rounds of hell, regardless of the scorecards. By the late 1970s, Duran had outgrown the lightweight division. He'd defeated everyone worth defeating, often multiple times. His body was maturing, making the 135-pound limit increasingly difficult to achieve. In 1978, he relinquished his lightweight title and moved up to welterweight, setting the stage for the rivalries with Sugar Ray Leonard, Thomas Hearns, and Marvin Hagler that would define the 1980s. But it's important to understand that Duran's 1980s fame, the Leonard fights, the No Mars controversy, the middleweight battles, was built entirely on the foundation he'd established during the 1970s. His lightweight reign created the legend. The later fights simply confirmed what those who'd followed his career already knew. Roberto Duran was one of the most complete fighters the sport had ever seen. Duran's legacy from the 1970s is secure. He proved that smaller fighters could capture the public imagination through sheer ferocity and skill. He demonstrated that dominance wasn't about size, but about will, intelligence, and the capacity to impose one's style on every opponent. He showed that a fighter from poverty could become a national hero through excellence in the ring. And he established a standard of all-around ability that future generations of fighters would aspire to, but rarely achieve. Roberto Duran fought professionally until 2001, competing into his 50s and winning titles in 4 different weight classes. But it was the 1970s, and specifically his lightweight reign, that established him as one of the greatest fighters in boxing history, a warrior whose hands truly were made of stone and whose heart was made of something even harder. Muhammad Ali, the man who owned an era, And now we arrive at number one. Not merely the greatest fighter of the 1970s, but perhaps the most influential athlete of the 20th century. A man whose impact transcended boxing, transcended sport, and entered the realm of cultural and political iconography. Muhammad Ali didn't just dominate the 1970s, he defined them. Muhammad Ali was born Cassius Marcellus Clay, Jr. on 17th of January 1942 in Louisville, Kentucky. He'd already established himself as the most talented heavyweight in boxing history by the mid-1960s, winning Olympic gold in 1960 and the heavyweight championship in 1964 by defeating Sonny Liston. His combination of speed, footwork, and psychological warfare was unprecedented in the heavyweight division. He famously declared, "I am the greatest," and proved it repeatedly. Then came his exile. In 1967, Ali refused induction into the United States military, citing his religious beliefs as a member of the Nation of Islam and his opposition to the Vietnam War. "I ain't got no quarrel with them, Viet Cong," he declared, a statement that resonated with many Americans but infuriated others. He was stripped of his heavyweight title, banned from boxing, and faced criminal prosecution. He was convicted of draft evasion, though the conviction would later be overturned by the Supreme Court. Ali lost 3.5 years of his prime, years when he should have been defending his title and cementing his legacy. Instead, he became a controversial figure in American society, celebrated by some as a man of principle who'd sacrificed everything for his beliefs, reviled by others as a traitor and draft dodger. When he finally returned to boxing in 1970, he was 28 years old, and many questioned whether he could reclaim his former dominance. The 1970s would provide the answer, though not in the way anyone expected. Ali didn't dominate through invincibility. He dominated through survival, through absorption of punishment that would have destroyed lesser fighters, through sheer force of will when his physical gifts began to fade. On 8th of March 1971, Ali faced Joe Frazier at Madison Square Garden in the fight of the century. Both men were undefeated. Both claimed to be the true heavyweight champion. The fight was as much about vindication as victory. Ali entered as a slight favorite, but Frazier's relentless pressure and brutal left hook proved decisive. Ali was knocked down in the 15th round and lost a unanimous decision, his first professional defeat. The loss devastated Ali psychologically, but also freed him from the burden of invincibility. He could lose and still be great. He rebuilt, defeating opponents including Jerry Quarry, Floyd Patterson, and Bob Foster. Then came the trilogy with Ken Norton. A broken jaw in their first fight, controversial decisions in the second and third. Norton had solved Ali in ways no one expected, exposing vulnerabilities in Ali's defense and timing. But the defining moment of Ali's 1970s career came on 30th of October 1974 in Kinshasa, Zaire. The rumble in the jungle against George Foreman was supposed to be Ali's execution. Foreman had demolished Joe Frazier and Ken Norton, the two men who'd given Ali his most difficult fights. At 32, Ali was considered past his prime, whilst Foreman was 25 and seemingly unstoppable. Ali's tactical genius produced the rope-a-dope strategy, leaning against the ropes, absorbing Foreman's power shots whilst conserving energy, waiting for the younger man to punch himself into exhaustion. It was extraordinarily risky. If Ali had miscalculated Foreman's power or his own ability to absorb punishment, the fight would have ended in disaster. But Ali understood something fundamental. He could take more punishment than Foreman could deliver without exhausting himself. The 8th round knockout of Foreman stunned the world. Ali had reclaimed the heavyweight championship through a combination of courage, intelligence, and sheer toughness. He'd proven that even past his physical prime, his ring intelligence and psychological dominance could overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. The victory set up the rubber match with Joe Frazier, The thriller in Manila on the 1st October 1975. If the first two fights had been brutal, Manila was something beyond description. Fought in oppressive heat, both men pushed each other to the absolute limit of human endurance. Ali dominated early. Frazier roared back in the middle rounds, and the later rounds saw both men fighting through damage and exhaustion that should have ended the fight. Frazier's corner stopped the fight after 14 rounds, unable to send their nearly blind warrior out for a 15th. Ali collapsed in his corner, later saying he'd felt closer to death than in any other fight. The thriller in Manila took something irreplaceable from both men. Neither would ever be quite the same afterwards. Ali continued fighting through the late 1970s, defending his title against challengers including Chuck Wepner, Ron Lyle, and Ernie Shavers. His reign ended with losses to Leon Spinks in 1978, though he reclaimed the title in their rematch, becoming the first three-time heavyweight champion. He retired in 1979, attempted an ill-advised comeback in 1980, and finally retired permanently after a loss to Trevor Berbick in 1981. What made Ali the greatest fighter of the 1970s wasn't invincibility. He lost multiple times during the decade. It was his ability to survive and prevail, despite absorbing tremendous punishment, despite being past his physical prime, despite facing an era of heavyweight talent that has never been matched. He defeated Joe Frazier twice. He shocked George Foreman. He survived Ken Norton's awkward brilliance. He did it through ring intelligence, psychological warfare, and toughness that bordered on superhuman. Ali's legacy extends far beyond boxing. He became a symbol of resistance to injustice, a cultural icon whose influence shaped sports, politics, and social movements. But in the 1970s specifically, he proved that greatness isn't measured by perfection. It's measured by how you respond to adversity, how you survive when survival seems impossible, and how you find ways to win when every rational analysis suggests you should lose. Muhammad Ali owned the 1970s, not because he was unbeatable, but because he refused to be beaten by anything. Not age, not exile, not devastating punches, not the accumulation of damage that ended lesser careers. He was simply the greatest,